Does the solo 401k qualify for the rule of 55? Hi, this is financial planner Sean Mullaney. Let's discuss. So the solo 401k over the last decade has really sort of come to prominence as more and more folks are like myself working for themselves, and they're setting up the solo 401k to get some great tax deductions when they're self-employed, build up tax advantage retirement savings. When they're self-employed, it's fantastic. But there are some lingering uncertainties out there. One of them is, might a distribution from a solo 401k qualify for the so-called rule of 55? Recall, that's where we leave employment for our employer at the age of 55, or the year we turn 55 more appropriately, and we're able to take from their qualified plan a distribution, not pay that 10% early withdrawal penalty. Folks love the rule of 55. But on the solo 401k, it's a little bit of a chicken and egg, because we're saying we separated from service. Okay, great. But we're also saying, well, wait a minute, are we still a quote-unquote employer if we've separated from service such that we qualify to have a solo 401k? And the Internal Revenue Code, it's section 401C. I'm going to put a link to it in the description below. It has this sort of cryptic language in there that's hard to decipher, even for a tax nerd like me, saying, well, you know what? If you used to be self-employed in the past, you can qualify as being self-employed for purposes of having a so-called qualified plan, which is a solo 401k, and there are other types out there. So it's like, well, what does that mean? All right, how do we interpret that? Well, I went back to when that language first appeared in the Internal Revenue Code, and it's basically the same today, the year 1962, right? Before 1962, the self-employed, the solopreneurs could not have qualified plans. And in 62, they said, all right, that's enough. Self-employed people matter too, right? And so they get to have qualified plans. And they put this language in about, well, if you're a former self-employed person, you can qualify such that you could have a qualified plan even though you're no longer self-employed. But the language was real cryptic, hard to decipher. But also in that 62 Act, there's this really interesting rule. It said back then, if you had a self-employed qualified plan and you wanted to take money out before the age of 59 and a half, you were not allowed to do so. The money had to remain inside the qualified plan at least until you turned age 59 and a half. Once you turn 59 and a half, you could take the money out. But what that means is this. Let's say you were in your early to mid 50s and you retired and you had money in a self-employed qualified plan. You were required to remain an employer so that you could hold that self-employed qualified plan, because the money couldn't come out. There was no IRA back then. The IRA comes in the mid 70s, right? So in the early to mid 60s, no IRA. That wasn't even a theoretical possibility. And they said you couldn't even take a regular distribution, even if you had retired, or maybe you went from self-employment to a full-time W-2 job. Didn't matter. You were still an employer for qualified plan purposes. Well, that's really good news, because that means a retired solopreneur today, same language in the code, can still be an employer for purposes of maintaining their solo 401k, even though they're retired. Well, wait a minute, Sean. Okay, well, how does that apply to the rule of 55, though? Because for the rule of 55, we're saying we separated from service. So aren't we now speaking out of both sides of our mouths? I'm here to tell you, in my opinion, absolutely not. Why do I say that? Well, the determination of whether we've separated from service is a factual inquiry under Section 72T of the Internal Revenue Code, right? That's where the rule of 55 lives. And the question there is, have we factually separated from service so that we qualify for this early withdrawal penalty exception, right? That is a very different inquiry with different standards than, are we a quote-unquote employer for purposes of having a qualified plan, which is determined under Section 401. They're totally different inquiries. And Section 401 clearly incorporates the past. Retired solopreneurs get credit for their past, having been 2, 3, 5 years ago, having been self-employed and having been an employer back then. They get to pull that forward under this legal generosity from Congress that was first enacted in the year 1962. So what that means is, in my opinion, and look, this is not a 100% bulletproof issue, But what that means is, generally speaking, Schedule C solopreneurs, in my opinion, get to take advantage of the rule of 55 with respect to solo 401ks. Now, you got to look at your plan documents to make sure that under the particular plan in question, partial distributions in retirement before age 59 and a half are possible. The other little wrinkle here is S corporations, right? There's this language in 401c that says, well, okay, the self-employed get to be considered employers essentially because they previously were an employer. No similar language, to my knowledge, exists with respect to the S corporation. If we liquidate that S corporation, well, now we've liquidated the employer and we just don't have anything to sponsor the solo 401k. So before the liquidation, that solo 401k looks like it's got to go to an IRA, or maybe you get a new job and you put it in that qualified plan. So I think the solo 401k and the rule of 55 for those Schedule C solopreneurs out there is a possibility. This is my opinion. It's not opinion or advice for your own personal circumstances. The research on this was so compelling, I wrote a 27-page article that I've linked to off my blog, FItaxGuy.com. I'm going to drop that link in the description below. And either on my blog and or on this video, please comment. Hey, Sean, totally agree, totally disagree. Give me your thoughts and your opinions on this issue. It's a really fascinating issue when we look at the evolution of the self-employed retirement account and the solo 401k. This is an area that's been subject to some confusion and some uncertainty, and I hope my research and writing helps move the needle in the direction more towards certainty, although my article by itself certainly doesn't solve the issue for all time. Let me know what you think in the comments below. If you like this video, please smash that like button and subscribe to my channel. I'll see you next time.